Okay, hello everyone. My name is Matthias, and I work at a company named Nike Sportswear. We are a 3D studio, like small to mid-size, based in Munich. We are doing 3D mainly for TV commercials. Sometimes we do trade show backgrounds for the big car companies, like when Audi is going to the Geneva Motor Show, they usually build huge power walls in the back and we render for that. We do internet stuff, 3D for everyone that pays us for doing it, basically. We are a bit on the designery side of things. We don't do feature film. So if you expect a project where New York is destroyed and aliens are coming and everything blows up, that's not what we do. What we do is projects like Nike Techfleece, for example. That's a project we did last year. Techfleece is a product line of Nike for the grim weather season when it's fall and winter and there's rain and cold temperatures. You're supposed to put on a Techfleece jacket. It's protecting you from the environment. It keeps you warm and it's cozy and nice. And we did a spot for the launch of the fall and holiday season 16. And this is the final product. So cozy. But of course, I'm not talking about Nike today. That's just for name dropping, so the room is full up and everyone thinks, ooh, that's a great presentation. I'm going to talk about how we did things. This spot was done in Cinema 4D for some 95% maybe, and I think it's a good project to talk about and just go through the film shot by shot, sequence by sequence, and show a few setups, how we did things, how we created this spot. So sequence number one that I want to talk about is the flow lines. Lines coming off of the shot guy, of his arm, and then just spinning around in space and creating that motion sculpture thing. I guess you've seen especially this shot before. It's not that original, if I'm honest. It's just a motion capture guy running, tracing the lines behind him. But it works very nicely because the product of Nike, Techfleece, is supposed to be a mixture between something you wear at home on your couch, but you can also do sports in it. So we need to bring in both that warm and comfy feeling, but also that sporty aspect of the thing. So that's why we have that running guy tracing the lines behind him, just to have that motion aspect in the film as well. The lines coming off of that guy in the first shot when he's moving the arm up, they are like particles emitted from the surface of the motion captured arm, and they follow a pattern known as curl noise. Curl noise is something that was quite trendy the last year or so. It's a bit like the new lens flare and the new heavy, strong depth of field effect. It's something that you use and it's always looking nice. If you don't know what to do, trace some curl noise, it's going to look nice, guaranteed. So I thought we'd do a quick intro to curl noise. It's really not that hard. I'm going through the formulas one by one, just explaining what is going on. No, I don't. That was just a joke, because no one's interested in what the formula does. What we are interested in is what it actually does, what it looks like. This is a snapshot of the Wikipedia article, so if you're interested in curl noise and how to create it on a very low, basic level, that's the formulas. So if you're interested, I don't know how they work. That's the Wikipedia article. I know that it looks pretty. and people using it quite a lot. An Entagma image, my boss is using it, so it must be nice. And people on the internet are using it, so it's definitely nice, and it's something that you should use as well. It's not really a noise. If you're in that mathematical thing, it's a function that turns a noise into something more beautiful than just a standard noise. It's taking a Perlin noise and it's doing its magic tricks, and it's generating those organic forms, looking a bit like ripples on a flowing river, and it's just looking very nicely because it's got that organic touch. So if you've got particles floating around and you've got a curl noise affecting those particles, they will look nicer than having just a standard Perlin noise affecting those particles to create turbulence, because it's giving you more organic shapes. That's the bottom line. If you have the chance, use curl noise instead of normal Perlin noise, because the look is way more organic. That's the thing I want to mention here. How to get curl noise in Cinema 4D is it's not built in. Cinema doesn't have a curl noise function. If you're using X particles, my screenshot is maybe a bit tiny here, but if you get a turbulence in X particles, there's a noise type curl up there. So that's generating that organic curl noise in X particles. If you don't have X particles, there's a curl noise effector on GitHub. So if you just type in curl noise effector for Cinema 4D, that's going to be the first search result. You go on GitHub and you can download the curl noise effector, which is a Python thingy. It's available as an effector for MoGraph and as a node for thinking particles in Espresso. As this is called workshop, I thought it would be nice to also go into Cinema 4D and do things for real and not just show them on screenshots I did. It's always a bit risky because things will fuck up, but please bear with me. I hope they don't go wrong too badly. So first one, curl noise as an effector, just very quickly. That's the thing you get when you download the GitHub. You get an effector. There's some Python code in here. We don't care about that. What we care about here, there's a few settings that you can change, and the way it works is you put it into a cloner, make sure it's affecting that cloner, and when you hit play, what you get is exactly that, curl noise, lines flowing in that organic fashion. So that's way number one to get curl noise. Download it as a MoGraph effector. I trace the clones, by the way, to get the lines. So the spheres are cloned into a source sphere affected by the curl noise effector, and then I use a tracer to just trace those lines. Or it's also available as a thinking particles Espresso node. So if we check that, it's basically the same thing. You're getting yourself some particles. You read the data from them. That's the node I downloaded from the internet, Python code. Again, we don't care about that. What we care about is it's got the same parameters than the effector for MoGraph. It's taking the current position of the particle. It's changing it around in the curl fashion. It's setting the position. Oops, sorry. And you're done. If you hit play and you trace the particles, you've got the same thing. Curl noise, tracing lines. And that's exactly how we did the first shot, where the guy is moving up his arm and there's those lines coming off of his arms. The lines are traced particles shot from a stand-in geometry from his arm, affected by curl noise, traced, put in the sweep NURBS to get geometry from it, rendered, and you're done. You're not quite done because, first different shot. That's just for interest. It's mocap data, also downloaded from the internet. I have to say that we didn't need very specific motion, so we just downloaded that ready-made mocap data. That guy emitted the particles in the second and third shot, so all the white areas here in that guy. are a selection saved, and that selection is used as the emitter for particles. So we got a particle system emitting from these selected polygons, curl noise on top, sweep NURBS, you've got your traced lines. Of course, you can do own motion capture, you can manually animate that guy, but that wasn't really necessary. It was just that generic run, and that was available on the internet. So the question here is, why should I work if someone else can work for me? And I get home early. Perfect. And then, all right, you've got the lines coming off of that guy or off of the arm in that first shot, and you're creating nice organic curl noise motion in the air. And you send that to the client, and they say, "Ooh, that is looking awesome. It's really looking great. But can you twist that one streak in the beginning just a bit to the camera so we see more of it? But can you twist the other ones a bit to the back so it's flatter and we don't see that much from it?" And you go, "Oh, all right." I mean, it's a sweep NURBS, and it's got a rotation parameter. So if you're tracing a sweep NURBS and it's that flat streak in the air, you can twist it with the parameters in the sweep, but that is very crude. And if you've got long sweeps, it's a bit frickly. You don't really get good control over everything. So if you want to twist streaks in a more, in a nicer, in a more controllable fashion, that would require a rig. And the rig for the streaks looked like this. I colored them in funky colors so you can see the different ones. That's the starting point. It's taking a spline. Right now I've just used a straight one, because if you're creating rigs, create them in a simple environment. Once they are working, promote them to more complex environments. So don't use 50,000 trace particles with curl noise and whatnot and fancy camera moves to create your rig. Create your rigs in a simple, clean scene, and when they're working, bring them into your actual shot. That's also why I brought reduced scenes. I deleted all the clutter. There's no lights, no shaders, no nothing. I brought the stuff we're actually talking about, and that's also how I work. If you create something, create it in an empty scene at world zero. Don't confuse yourself with stuff you don't need to be concerned about. And that's the finished streaks rig. You've got a streak consisting of sub-streaks, and what you can do to change the shape of the streak is you click the controller, you move it around, and the streak is changing its shape accordingly. Okay, you could do that with the underlying spline. The beauty comes in if you do more fancy things. The controllers, for example, also support rotation. So you can rotate the streak to give it exactly the shape you want it to be. And especially controlling the rotation of a sweep NURBS, it's not called NURBS anymore, sorry, of a sweep, is not that controllable using the attributes you've got in the sweep. So this rig really gives you the control that you need by just clicking on a controller and tell, okay, in this area, I want it to be rotated slightly to the back. And that's a very intuitive way of adjusting the streaks in your scene. It's also got one more cool little feature. If you don't use the big controller, but the small ones, you can also grab the individual substreaks, which are all also sweep NURBS, and you pull them out and generate a feathering effect. So the streak is breaking into its substreaks, and if you do that here, for example, it breaks apart, and also it can reunion back to its big shape. So that's a very, very flexible way of working. The controllers, by the way, also support scaling. No, they don't. That was just for the joke. I knew they won't. I thought they would. Whatever. They could. If you want them to, you could make them support scaling. The way this rig is built is, if you go to a simpler scene, because again, this might look a bit overpowering. If I fold this out, because I don't want to hide stuff here, there's a lot of stuff. There's null objects and more null objects, and there's a few espresso rigs which is also, by the way, supporting animation of the things. So I have sliders animating the growth over those sweeps. And if I fold this one up, I've got a bigger screen in the office, so it's a bit tiny here for me. There's handles and position constraints, and if I fold these up, there's more handles, and if I fold that away, there's the sweeps finally, and there's a line instance and tracers and a lot of stuff. So that's not really a good scene to understand what's going on. So I thought that bigger rig, which is my final rig that I used for the streaks, it would be nice to break that down even further. So in a file named streaks simple, you don't see anything, and that's how you start. This rig is built by creating an empty polygon, which is available here. Mesh, create object empty polygon. An empty polygon is a polygon object which doesn't have any shape, it's just an axis. This is what you see here. We've got an axis sitting at world 0. World axis? No, not quite, but nearly. So we've got only the axis of the empty polygon. And what I did in point mode, I added one single point to that empty polygon, and this is sitting here. You do that by control clicking, and you create points. So we've got an empty polygon. The empty polygon has an axis and one single point. That single point is sitting 100 centimeters away, because it's also nice to use even numbers so you don't confuse yourself with a position that is 279.1.3476, because that's just not nice. So this point is sitting at 100 centimeters in X. And this is important because this empty polygon now has two informations for me. It holds the information where is the axis and where is the point. I duplicate that empty polygon, do the same thing again. I've got another axis here and another point here, because I just moved that empty polygon in X direction. And then I've got two tracers here. The first tracer is taking my two empty polygons and it's connecting the objects, and it's not tracing the vertices, which means it's tracing the pivots, the axis. So if I switch that on, I've got a line going from the axis of the first object to the axis of the second object, because trace vertices is off. And then I've got a second tracer, which is doing the same thing. It's connecting my two polygon objects, but now this is tracing the vertices. So it's not building a line from the axis to the axis, but from the point of the point to the point of those two objects. This is generating a line here. And now I just do a sweep, put those two tracers into the sweep, activate the cross section, which is just a straight line. And this basically is how my rig is built. I've got the empty polygon, I can move it around, the tracer is updating. And as this line is the path and the other tracer is generating the rail spline, basically, I can control the path and the rail spline with my two controller objects here, my empty polygons, which can be renamed to controller objects, obviously. This one here is supporting scaling, and that's why I thought my other rig would too. I don't know what broke, but it does support scaling, because if I scale that empty polygon, I just move that point, that single point I created away, changing the rail spline, therefore supporting scaling in my sweep, which is also very nice. And obviously it's also supporting rotation, because if I rotate my object, it's rotating the point that's sitting underneath. The tracer is updating, the sweep is updating. Very nice. Now I can make this more user-friendly by not having the empty polygons in my scene, but creating null objects, which maybe also sit in the middle of that generated sweep, and then just a PSR constraints my empty polygons to null objects to get proper controllers. Just a very quick setup, making things easy by using some more elaborate things and not just going for the sweep. And if you want to rotate the thing, of course, you can go into the sweep. There's the rotation right here. It's also got the spline. But that is very hard to control. It's much easier to click into your shot, rotate the spline when you can actually touch the sweep and rotate it. It's much more intuitive than using a attribute that is just there and it's not really related to what you see in your scene, because it's here, you see your sweep here. So it's much nicer to just click into your editor, rotate things the way you want them to. Quick tip, if you ever wondered why there is no primitive straight line in the spline section here, that is something I use quite often. Just a straight line for cases like this where you just need a sweep. Use an end side and set the end side to 2 sides. This is giving you a straight line as a primitive in a very quick way. The default is, I think, 8, so this is what you get when you create an end side, and if you just set the sides to 2, you've got a straight line. Very quick way of creating a straight line. Okay, now we've got 2 controllers creating our sweep, and if you just duplicate them, move them along and update the tracer so they are connecting all the empty polygons you have. So you just hit Control-C, Control-V, create more of them, you get loads of controllers, and now it would be nice if they would be arranged on a center spline that was created by the trace particles using the curl noise. So you can, of course, move those controllers by hand wherever you want them to. That's option number 1, but that's a bit tedious because you need to do manual work and it's very hard to change afterwards, and you don't get nice flowing curves properly, and you already got your trace particles. So it would be nice if these controllers would be arranged on a spline automatically. Next setup, because that's also something I want to tell you, build setups modularly. So you build a tiny thing first, and then you improve on that, and if you need more functionality, think of that functionality maybe in a different scene and then combine everything together in the end. So the problem of how do I distribute lots of objects on a spline evenly was solved in this scene. I've got, I don't know, 17 spheres all sitting here in my scene center, and I want them to be distributed on that spline evenly. The way I did this was using an espresso tag. If I enable this, you see it's already working. These splines distribute evenly. That is done in a very quick way. I don't know if you use espresso a lot. I thought I'd just show a simple setup, so maybe someone here is afraid of those nodes and doesn't really know what's going on. It's really a simple system to get things quickly. What you do here, just walking through the nodes quickly, a hierarchy node is giving you all the nodes under in the hierarchy under the object the tag is sitting on by default. So the tag is sitting on my null object, some spheres. So what the hierarchy node does is it's providing me with all the spheres that are children of that top null object. Okay. And that's the object output. So here, the object output is giving me all the spheres in that hierarchy. It's also telling me the count, so it's telling me there's 17 objects in there. I can subtract 1 from it, and that's because Cinema starts counting at 0. If Cinema is counting from 1 to 5, it's not doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's starting at 0. So Cinema is counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's counting to 1, count minus 1, because I've got 5 objects, but Cinema is counting from 0 to 4. That's why I subtract 1 from the count. I've got 17 spheres, but I know Cinema is counting from 0 to 16, so I need to subtract 1 from the count. And then I just check, index means the number of the sphere like listed in the position the sphere has in that hierarchy. So the first sphere's got index 0, because Cinema always starts counting from 0. The second sphere is number 1, the third sphere is number 2, and so on. So I can divide that, and this is giving me a percentage. I divide the current index number by the total number, and this is giving me a percentage of how far on the spline it should be moved along. So I can use this in a spline node, which is basically giving me the align to spline functionality in Espresso. I tell it, okay, on that spline, which is that one here, please position the sphere we're currently talking at an offset which I just calculated. So this basically distributes all the spheres evenly. If there's any in-depth questions and why the divide is giving me a percentage and why is that starting from 0 important, I'm here all day and we can do in-depth Espresso. I agree that it's a bit hard to just watch that on a screen and really understand what's going on. If you try it out and you connect the nodes for yourself, it's much, much easier to understand what the setup is doing. But we've got a setup distributing these spheres evenly. And the cool thing is, if I put in more spheres in that hierarchy, they are distributed automatically. So I don't need to worry how many objects I have. I just throw them into that align to spline thing, basically, into the hierarchy that my Espresso is sitting on, and it's distributing automatically. And combining all this I talked about the last 10 minutes or so into one setup is giving me my Streaks full rig. I've got my controllers that are controlling an empty polygon, axis here, point here. It's driven by a null object, which is PSR constrained to that empty null. So I've got a handle I can grab that is in the middle. And I've got loads of controllers evenly distributed on my source spline, which is the other setup I've shown you. So it's two setups combined into one, which is giving you a more complex setup, but it's still easy to control. You understand what's going on, and you can cater for all the changing needs of your client. So in the end, this setup here was used to create the first sequence, guy moving his arm up, lines shooting out. You can manually control the orientation of the lines that are shooting out, because that was something we got a lot of feedback on. Can you twist that a bit here, and can you twist that a bit here? So that was the reason this setup was created. Sequence 1 finished. Sequence 2, breathing claws. This is something I don't really need to talk a lot about, because this was done in Maya and cloth. Bam. Just because it was a one-click solution, really. We had a freelancer in the office who's regularly using Maya, and he said, oh, that is a shot that can be done in Encloth in no time. It was half an hour, click, 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 bam, all done. If you want to do this in cinema, especially the breathing close-up part where it's separating, I would say I haven't tried it, so I don't know if it would work, but if I had to try it, I would try a pose morph first. Create the closed shape as the base shape, and then create a pose morph with the opened up shape, where the cloth is stretching apart. And then this gives you a slider where you can just do 0, 100% slide between the two states, closed and open state. And if you need more control over a pose morph, something that is not really that well known for some reason, there's a morph deformer. A morph deformer is taking the morphs you created and adding fall-offs to them. So it's an object you can actually move around in your shot that is controlling where the pose morph is happening. So it's a pose morph with fall-off, morph deformer. Very nice one. If you haven't used it, try it out, because it gives you more control over pose morphs. It's not just that 0%, 100% slider animate, but you can move objects around on your surface and maybe get this effect going. But to tell you the truth, I'm not lying here, this was done in Maya and cloth, because it was quicker. Next sequence. We've got some close-up cloth, and frost is growing over the surface, and we dive into the jacket because it's got 2 layers of cloth and warm air is trapped in the middle. That's why all the frost is blown away by the awesomeness of Techfleece. The last shot, now I was too slow talking, now we need to watch that all over again. That last shot where you see that wrinkled piece of cloth, this one here, bamming away the frost, that's a post-morph. You sculpt two objects, a wrinkled one, a flat, blown up one, post-morph 0, 100% over 2 frames, bam, it's blowing up. No need for simulation, no nothing. The frost growing on the surface, that was done. We render our projects in Octane mostly, and the frost was done using Octane Scatter, which is an instancing tool that comes with Octane. Basically, it's a MoGraph cloner. It's just putting loads and loads of objects on a surface, and as it's built into Octane, it's very efficiently. It doesn't put any strain on graphics cards, memory, because lots of objects typically take lots of memory to render, but not if you use instancing. So Octane Scatter is Octane's instancing tool, and we just scatter those modeled frost spike thingies onto the surface, and the growing effect was done using the scale attribute in the Octane Scatter. So it's taking a shader to control the scale of the single scattered pieces. There's a noise just to give it some randomness, so they are not all the same height, but height varies a bit. And then there's an animator gradient just running through. The gradient is multiplied onto that noise, and the gradient is animated, so it's moving across the surface, and it's looking like this. Frost growing on a surface. The gradient in Cinema got its own turbulence option, so the gradient is not a straight line, but if you put some turbulence in, it's deformed, so it's even more natural. You don't have a straight line moving across, but it's like giving you variation a bit. Once again, you go to Cinema, check my next file, which is cloth model. This is the flat model of our Techfleece. We didn't use the whole jacket. We thought it would be nicer to just have that rectangular cut from the surface. It's got a very distinct pattern. It's got one side which is very flat, and then the other side is having these small greases going across. And we thought it just using the whole jacket would be a bit like stereotypical. There's no twist to it, no nothing. So we thought we do a representation of the actual jacket by having just that rectangular cut. That's also a nice move because we don't need to create 15 different movies for 15 different products, but we can say, oh, that's all Techfleece with one film. Great. This thing here was created with a function of the cloner, which I came to love quite a bit. It's starting from the beginning. What we have in here is a loft. Let me just disable the other one and see what's going on here. There's a few splines modeled by hand, manually done, and they generate the cross-section of that piece of cloth. So in here where it's merging, you've got that streaked section modeled with a spline, and then it's morphing over to a shape which is flatter, and if you put that in a loft, this is what happens. Streak coming here, a small wave because that's looking nicer and more like stitching, and then it's continuing in a flat fashion. And there's a short one, this one here, which has a short streaked section and a long flat one, and there's a long one which is the opposite. There's a long streaked section and a short flat one. And the way the cloner is creating this thing here, it's you're cloning 89 of them, and then you're using the clone mode blend. This is also something which you should experiment with a bit. It's giving you so much flexibility. Default is iterate. So it's using the short one, the long one, the short one, the long one. It's iterating between the two. It's just going through and using one or the other. If you go to blend, what happens is it's starting with the short one, and it's checking what the parameters of this loft is, so what the splines are that sit underneath. And then it's cloning 89 or whatever clones, and while cloning, it's blending all the parameters between those two objects, and this is giving us this piece of cloth here. It's very, very nice if you, for example, have a cube in here with a tiny bit of rounding, and the second object is a cube with a big rounding setting. The cloner will blend between them, so you've got loads of cubes with the parameter rounding being blended between sharp and strong. So that's very nice for modeling. If you go in, you see that it's working rather nicely, with a bit of problem going on in the connection areas here, where it's not actually connecting nicely like here. And this is fixed not by a function, but by a guy. I'm very sorry to tell you there's setups for everything, but sometimes you can't avoid it and you just need to do manual work. I know I hate it too, but sometimes it's just you can't avoid it, and this is the final mesh we used. We stitched all the points together that didn't fit. We optimized the workflow a bit so we are not ending up with too many polygons, and this is the final mesh that we used for all the shots where cloth is visible in our film. Created by a blending cloner, fine-tuned a bit by manual labor. The texture for the weaving onto this cloth was also created by ourselves. Of course, you can go onto the internet and type in cloth normal tiling texture, and you'll get something, and you can use it, and it will look nice, and then you will get an email from Nike saying, yeah, that looks nice, but that is not our cloth, because we spent $3 million on researching how to weave that thing, so it's giving us exactly the properties we wanted to have, and you can't just use any cloth, you need to use our cloth. So that's why we created a displacement map for the weaving bumps using cloners as well. If you have a macro lens, you can take very close-up pictures of cloth and you really see where the single threads are going. And you can just recreate that weaving pattern by a cloner, as it is very, very tileable already. So if you disable all the cloners, you can see this is the basic shape. You've got two strings, two threads making up the pattern. One is doing that S shape and another one is doing that U shape. And if you combine them, this will give you in a bigger picture the actual weaving that is going on in the cloth. That's manually created splines, circle, sweep, and you're done. In reality, this of course would not intersect that thing, so it would go a bit in this way and to the right, and the bottom one would go a bit to the left, but if you don't see it, it's not wrong. We went into the sweep, used the scale spline to simulate that stretching of the thread, so it's looking a bit more organic. Actually, we also, after doing this, we converted the whole thing, brought it into sculpting and sculpted a bit on the threads to make them even more organic looking. In sculpting, it's also rather easy to just get rid of that intersection by just pushing polygons over a bit, creating some more detail to the thread, so it's not looking so technical. But the general thing was this pattern just being cloned in a grid-like section. You create a top camera, and if you want to go really fancy, you don't use a circle as the cross section, but you use the flower primitive. And you've got that twisted sub-thread thing going on which is giving you even more detail in that soon-to-be texture. The way to turn this setup into a texture is we created a height map from it, black to white, and a very easy way to do this is to use a gradient using a 3D linear gradient that is starting at a specific position in the shot and that is ending at a specific position in the shot. So black is start, white is end. We've got a black and white gradient going from minus 0.8 to plus 265, and these two things are easily controlled by null objects. You can control shaders with Espresso. We don't have a proper shading tree, that is true, but single shaders can be controlled using Espresso. If you want to control a gradient with two null objects, so I've got one null object here sitting at the bottom of my shot, another null object just moved up, and these two null objects should control the gradient. So what I can do is how to bring a shader into Espresso is you grab the preview frame here, which is not that intuitive. That is something that took me quite a while to figure out. You grab the preview image here, drag and drop it into Espresso, and now you've got access to the settings of this gradient, which is very, very nice, because in here you've got shader properties, you've got the end and the start position of that gradient. And now you just take the position of the start and end null object and control the gradient by these null objects. Very intuitive way of controlling a gradient. All right, so we rendered. If I just hit render, that should render, I guess. A depth map. This can be used as displacement or a bump on our rectangular piece of Techfleece that we just created. And now the only thing is, what do we do with that rectangular piece of Techfleece, this one here, because it's rather high polygon, you can't really animate with it. So it's got a lot of polygons, rather dense. If we check the count, it's 600,000 polygons, so there's no way you do cloth simulation or anything with that geometry. So a very nice way of working is you use a low-res approximation. So this one here is just a plane. It's rather low-res, so it doesn't really have that many polygons. Just as an example, I created a default cloth simulation. I just put the cloth tag on, fix these points, hit play. So no values tweaked to anything, but I've got cloth simulation going on. And this is the Techfleece I just created. And a way to bring this object into the shape of the low-res one that I can animate is using the surface deformer. A surface deformer, if I go back to the beginning, is initializing itself in a way that you just put it under the high-res object. You tell it, hey, high-res object, look at the low-res object and do exactly the same as the low-res object that is in here. So you hit initialize, it's checking all the distances and it's basically mapping the high-res object onto the low-res one. And now if I go back in time, it takes a bit. It's not real time, but my laptop is from 2010, so please bear with my old machine. It's rather fast in reality, and this is a very nice way of animating in very, very low-res scenes and then bringing your high-res object in later, making your workflow rather fast, because you only need to get the big thing when you render it at the very, very last stage of your production, and all that way until you actually hit render for the final rendering, you can work with low-res proxies, which is very nice. So this was this sequence. And the last one in the shot is called Wrap It Up, because we're wrapping up the shot, the film. And we're wrapping up the guy in that simulated cloth thingy disappearing behind him. The goal here was to have a controllable cloth simulation. We used Cinema's cloth simulation tools with a setup which made it very easy to control that animation. And this setup is looking like this. Cloth control. We've got here low res, plain, because we don't want to work on the high res. We established that already. We need the cloth to move in the shot in a very specific way. So this is also just an example scene used for testing and experimenting. It's got nothing to do with the final product, but the setup is the same. So I can control that low res thing by just animating it along a spline. Trivial. So we've got that plane, it's animating along the spline, it's doing exactly what I want because I've got keyframe animation. But now I want to turn this keyframe animated low-res thing into a cloth simulation. So I've got my cloth object, which is higher resolution. So it's actually giving me nice wrinkles and everything. It needs a bit of mesh resolution to actually do the simulation on. You can't be too low res here. This simulation geometry is later replaced by the actual mesh with the surface deformer as shown before. Now I can belt this cloth simulation geometry to my manually animated low-res geometry by using a belt. And you tell it, please belt on low-res that I animated. And if I hit draw, I belted, is that even a word? I belted all points to that low-res geometry here, which doesn't give me anything, basically. Oh, sorry, don't draw the belted points. If I hit play here, the cloth simulation is moving with my manual keyframe animation for 100% because all the points are belted onto my keyframe animation, which is not looking very interesting. I could actually just leave it out and just use my keyframe animation. The way to make this more interesting is to use a vertex map. Let me just hide the low-res one. I painted a vertex map that is going into the influence of that belt tag. And what this is doing is I can paint a vertex map saying, okay, in the front, as the map is brighter there, it means it's more intense, it's going towards 100%. In the front, please stick to the manual animation more. The red areas where I didn't paint any value into my vertex map don't stick to the manual keyframe animation at all. So that's the areas where a lot of cloth simulation is going to happen. And this is a very nice setup because if I hit play now, I can see that my cloth is moving with my keyframe animation while doing cloth-like simulation. And this is very nice because I've got something which is easily controllable, a vertex map, telling me where do I want animation, where do I want simulation. And that's always a nice thing with simulation, to have some manual control over it. Especially if you consider that you don't need to use a fixed static vertex map, but you can also animate a vertex map. So the vertex map is changing over time. Maybe you want more simulation in the beginning and towards the end when you are maybe forming a logo out of cloth. You want the simulation to stick more to what your keyframe animation is. This can be done by animating a vertex map. Now a vertex map can't be animated in Cinema. If someone from Maxon is here, please give us vertex map tools. Until you do, I wrote my own. Vertex map animator, this can also be found on my personal private webpage, zabiegly.com, by the way. But in a nutshell, very, very quickly, you can download a more complex version of this, but what it does is, you've got 3 vertex map. You've got one, I named it 1. You've got another one, I named it 2, and I've got a third one, and I named that result. And what you do is, in Espresso, you just check with these nodes that I'm not going through in detail, but it's open and you can take a look at it and see what's going on if you're interested. very, very quickly, what it does is it's taking this map and it's blending it into this map, writing the result into this map. And there's a user data blend maps here that I dragged into the editor. So you've got easy control. And what it does is, when I move the slider, you can see the two vertex maps blending into each other, and the result is written into the result vertex map. So if you use that in your cloth simulation, you've got very rudimentary, very simple control over the vertex map. You can go more advanced by blending more states into each other, by adding vertex maps over each other and whatnot. But it's possible to control vertex maps in Cinema using Expressor, so you can blend between the two. So this gives you even more control over the cloth simulation by just blending between two maps. Back to my presentation. Oh no, there's one more thing I want to show you. So we are going to the tab menu again. One cinema file I want to show you is this one, just because I think it's rather nice. This is character animation at its best. It's the guy from the footage just match moved. This is a collider body for the cloth simulation, and it's also just giving a shadow in the rendering. So this is not visible, it's just casting shadows, and it's used as a collider for the cloth simulation. You can see here the cloth is the low polygon. This one was simulated using the technique I just showed and then baked into PLA, because that's also something that we like to do if you've got approval on a shot. Bake things. If you bake it, it won't break. That's a cool thing. It will render on the farm, nothing goes wrong. Very nice. And a very, very quick match moved guy for collision and especially shadow casting. So this was Nike Techfleece. We basically went through the whole shot, looked at the whole spot, looked at all the more interesting setups, and maybe I was able to show you that it's not really like crazy fancy stuff going on. Everyone is using the same tools, and if you use the tools in the right way, you can do nice shots. Maybe it's about combining tools with each other to get more fancy looking effects. Start simple, start in an empty scene, create a simple setup, elaborate on that setup, combine different setups together, and you'll end up with something looking quite advanced, I guess. But bottom line, no crazy stuff going on that no one understands, because I'm not a big brain. Okay, we've spent the better part of an hour in that dark Nike world where everything is so awesome. So why not brighten our mood a bit and go for something a bit more funny? This is a television commercial for TEAC, which is an electricity provider. You can get your electricity power from that. And I would recommend that you do, because they are so cheap with their pricing for electricity, that even a 2-meter tall bear doesn't go bankrupt when he's blow drying his fur.
Jetzt mach ich mir mein Leben leicht, weil's mit der Stromabzocke reicht. Ich wasch und bügle ganz entspannt was weg. Auch wenn das Licht mal länger brennt, bei mir zu Hause keiner flennt. Ob's teuer wird, liegt ganz in meiner Hand. Und föhn ich mich trocken, kann's dauern wie's will. Ich brauch nicht mehr wechseln und spare Stress. Und Fernsehen, Haushalt oder so, ja, das macht mich alles froh. Und schaust du genauer hin, erblickst du Vorteile, die ganz ehrlich sind. Wechsel mal zur TEAC. Und wenn der Preis bei anderen steigt, hab ich noch lange nichts vergeigt. Noch nichts vergeigt.
Werden auch Sie zum Tariffaulpelz. Einmal wechseln, immer bleiben. Strom2019.com.
The bear is a photogrammetry of myself. No, it's not, of course. Character animation. is something I cannot really talk about because I'm not a character animator. If you've got any character animation questions, the two guys who animated this spot are sitting right here, so that's your guys. Can and Alex were the character animators on this shot. I've got I assembled a bit of a progression here. Shooting reference is something that is important because you can see how body parts are moving. I heard the story just yesterday, so I don't have the comparison in my slides here. They recorded the first shot where the bear is moving with the fish twice, once with a pillow as a standing for that plate with the fish, but it proved hard to get the motion right because it's a double bounce walk, and when you have something in your hand, Alex said that it's just very hard to get that double bounce walk going and focus on keeping that pillow in your hand. So that's also a cool thing with shooting reference and having various guys doing it, that you can simply pick the best. And sometimes you just need to leave things out because they don't really work in reality, but having that reference footage helps tremendously in animating shots because you can see what's happening in reality and you can take that as inspiration in the animation phase. That is something we've done quite a bit of character projects lately for television commercials, and shooting animation reference is something which they always did, so I guess it's something you should do as well because it helps. And one last time, over to cinema with a look at the bear. The bear is, that whole spot is 100% cinema rendered with Octane, and for the bear itself, a lot of cinema tools came into play as well. It's rigged with the character object, which is a very nice and quick way to rig things because it's a ready-made rig that you can just use to rig your characters. The only thing which was added was facial controls, which live up here, so it's sliders basically controlling pose morphs for the various aspects of the face. So you can just grab the controllers up here, do facial animation, controlling the underlying pose morphs. It's always a goal to make a rig simple and easy for animators, so they don't need to actually go in and dig into the hierarchy and see, okay, here's the meshes, here's the bear, and here's a pose morph, and oh, that's a lot of pose morphs for the facials here. If you have something like this, create controllers, hide all that stuff that is just frightening people, shut your hierarchies, have everything in the editor. It makes it very easy to just click onto things and animate intuitively and not go into crazy setups trying to find the right spot to animate stuff. The best interface slider in this interface I like is this one here, because it's just hiding all that stuff. And if you hit play, the bear's moving by character animation wizardry. An interesting thing in this shot here is the cable of that blow dryer, because that one uses, just like the cloth simulation I just talked about, a dual approach. It's partly keyframe animated, partly simulated. For this, there's a dual setup. There's a manual spline, this one here. Oops. This one is consisting of just a few points, 5, I think. And these points are controlled by null objects that you can click on, and if you move them, that L manual spline low is controlled by the null objects. This has 2 reasons. One, you can just click on the null objects, animate them with keyframes. You don't need to go to PLA to animate that manual spline, and you've got F-curves for it, because PLA in cinema doesn't have F-curves. It's always interpolating linearly. Please, Maxon, give us F-curves for PLA animation. That would be nice. Until then, you can control points using null objects. And there's a simulated spline, this one here. This one has got quite a lot of points because you need the points for the simulation to actually have something to simulate. It's got a spline dynamics tag, so it's just simulating the spline as if it were a thread, like a cable being simulated by Cinema. And then we've got, in the end, we used a result spline, a bit like blending between vertex maps to get a result vertex map. We blended between that manually animated spline and that simulated spline, and we got a result spline, which is giving us the possibility to just go into that blend factor and say, okay, I want more of my manually animated spline, or I want more of my simulated spline. The simulated spline tends to freak out with fast movements. So when the bear is blow drying down here and then he's moving his arm up within, I don't know, 4 frames or so, that's a rather fast movement, which looks nice and snappy in the animation, and you're always doing fast movements because that's more dynamic, and the bear is not like me, like doing slow movements, but it's really fast. But simulation doesn't like really fast, it's going really, fuck. And if the bear is moving his arm up, the simulated spline would go all bonkers. It's all over the place, it's moving way too much, so this is moments where you would rather go with the manual spline. So you animate your blend slider back. Please go more with manual animation. And once the freaked out simulation settles back in and it's giving you nice wobbly movements, you just animate the blend slider back, saying, okay, I want more of the simulation now. There's one step in between, just really quickly. If you want to blend between 2 states, it's essential that the 2 states have the same point count. Because then you can say, okay, if it's the same point count, it's very easy to blend between the 2. But this manually animated spline only got 5 points. The simulated ones got, I don't know, 28. So what we needed to do is to reproject the 2 splines with a spline that have the same amount of points. So we created a second spline, called it reproject. This one here's got, this one's here got 55 points. The reproject for the simulated spline has got 55 points as well. And this is done using Espresso again, using the same technique as shown before, where we distributed the spheres on the spline evenly. So you can see once you solve problems, you can reuse them. And people think you're really that Espresso wizard, but in reality, you're reusing your same 3 setups over and over again. And this is the same thing here. You take those 55 points, distribute them evenly over the simulated spline, and a second time, you take another 55 points, distribute them evenly over the manual animated spline, and now you've got 2 splines with the same point count, and your result spline can just also be 55 points with an Espresso, with a really simple Espresso saying, okay, first point is either at the position of the animated one or the simulated one, and there's a blend percentage controlling this, so this is giving you the blend slider where you can blend between manual animation and keyframe animation. Hair was done in Cinema as well. Hair system, very nice, very versatile, very fast, no problems at all. Please use it. You don't need to be concerned about any bugs or anything. It is awesome. I wanted to talk more about it, but I'm running short of time, so that's the bottom line. Hair, really nice. Also in conjunction with Octane, because it's very tightly integrated. Octane renders Cinema hair really nicely. This bear here's got 1 hair tag for the whole bear. If you do close-ups, it's better to separate this, so you have 1 hair object for face, 1 for body, 1 for the arm, so you can simply disable them. If you do a close-up of the face, you don't need to simulate hair at the feet of the guy. So this one was a far shot, so we used 1 for all. If we did close-ups, it's better to have separate hair objects for separate body parts. And this was that. I say thank you very much for joining me today, for being an interested audience. And as I'm just that one guy standing up here because I'm the Rampensau, but I didn't, of course I didn't do the shots all on my own. That's the credit list. If you wanna book some awesome freelancers, please don't book these guys because we book them. On the other hand, if you wanna be part of a credit list, right now we are really, really desperately looking for freelancers for projects that have already begun, that are going to begin in the next few weeks. So if you're bored and you know Cinema 4D or Houdini or After Effects or Nuke, please shoot us an email, jobs@ixsponsor.com. We're looking for you guys. So thank you for today and maybe see you in the office soon. Thanks.